What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to College Football Talk with Peter Burtnett, bringing you a recap of this past week's action. And in the later part of this video, I'm going to be kind of going over each of the top 10 teams in the latest AP poll, what I think about each of those teams, and kind of looking ahead a little bit to next week's action. But I think I'll have a video later this week taking a deeper dive into that because there is a huge game out in the Big 12 that could prove pivotal in the college football playoff race. But if you're going to enjoy this video, please feel free to leave a like, consider subscribing to the channel so you see more content like this, and hit those post notifications so you're always up to date when I post. But without further ado, let's dive into this week's action. And to talk about this week, you have to start with one of the first games of the week and with probably the biggest game of the week, the Red River Rivalry. The classic showdown in the Cotton Bowl with the Texas State Fair between Oklahoma and Texas. Going into the game, Texas was favored, I'm sure. They were the number 3 team in the country. Oklahoma was 12. Texas still carrying, momentum and still playing well after that win over Alabama. But Oklahoma coming in 5-0 after last year's 6-7 season, and it was a battle. It was a back and forth game. To get things started, Quinn Ewers had 2 interceptions on the game's opening 2 drives. He settled in after that, but it gave Oklahoma a little bit of probably early confidence that their defense would be able to slow down the Longhorns' offense. And that's what they were able to do when it was necessary in key moments of the game. So the game goes back and forth for the most part, leading into kind of the closing stages of the game. And Texas is driving down the field. They've got the ball, and Oklahoma makes a big stop to force a field goal. Auburn makes the field goal. Texas goes up 30-27 with a minute 17 left. And in this moment is when Dillon Gabriel stepped up big time, and he displayed the poise that is needed for a quarterback. He played with the skill set to be able to find his open receivers in the final drive of the game, which again, a minute 17 on the clock when it started. He was 4 for 5, 1 incompletion, and there's also a pass that was incomplete on a pass interference call. 58 passing yards on the drive and a touchdown. And in the game, he displayed kind of that same poise. He threw for 285 yards and 113 yards on the ground with also a rushing touchdown as well. And so a big game for Dillon Gabriel, the quarterback who seems like found a home in Oklahoma in the Sooners offense. And that's something that's kind of been a theme, these transfer quarterbacks, even under different coaches, coming into Oklahoma and finding kind of a home when maybe they didn't have that at UCF, for example, for Dillon Gabriel previously. And so he comes in, delivers big time for the Sooners, and it was a classic Red River rivalry and a welcome change from last year's 49-0 Texas beatdown. And so the Sooners pick up a huge win. Kind of diving into the post-game thoughts for both of these, because by the time you're seeing this video, you know what happened in the game. But what does it kind of mean for both of these teams moving forward? I think for Texas, they only dropped down to number 9. And with the schedule they have, I think you got to be careful to not just look at the records, but even just like matchups. Their toughest test that they have left is probably BYU. The Cougars are 4-1. Keaton Slovis at quarterback. BYU's offense can always throw the ball around, and so that'll be a challenge for the Texas defense. But other than that, any matchups that going into this season, a Kansas State, a TCU, Iowa State on the road, all of those games are games that really, as long as Texas doesn't overlook the opponent, I wouldn't even call them trap games. I guess the definition of a trap game is when you look ahead. But the Longhorns have a pretty clear path to get back to the Big 12 championship game and face these same Sooners again in Arlington. And for these Sooners, obviously Brent Venables is a defensive-minded coach. They did a good job against the Longhorns offense. It wasn't a, shutdown performance. It's not like how their defense played last year, shutting out the Sooners or even holding them under, a few touchdowns. But it was a good defensive effort. Dillon Gabriel looked incredibly strong in the pocket and delivering the necessary throws for Oklahoma. So it's a big win for the Sooners, and definitely the staple win. The Sooners now bump to number 5 in the AP poll, and same sort of thing. They have a pretty clear path to get to the Big 12 championship, and They can even afford to drop one. Obviously, they would prefer not to, but the Sooners are in an enviable position that they probably have a clear path to the Big 12 championship game. And even if they slip up once, if they can beat Texas again, and maybe they need a little bit of help outside, they could be headed to the college football playoff. So that's the takeaway from that one. Another important game, Alabama at Texas A&M. The Crimson Tide, after all the backlash, all the criticism that they faced after the Texas loss, and maybe even more so against USF, South Florida, even though they got the win in that game, it was a rough time at the quarterback position. Still were figuring things out, and it seems like by making the decision to stick with Jalen Milroe, it's paid off. The call by, I imagine, Nick Saban, maybe by the offensive coordinator, has paid off because Milroe, he did throw one interception, but overall had a really solid performance, 21 for 33, 321 yards, and 3 touchdowns. 2 of his receivers, Jermaine Burton, 9 for 197 yards and 2 of those touchdowns, and Isaiah Bond, 7 for 96 with a touchdown. So big game for Milroe at quarterback, and he seems to really be plugging into the Alabama offense well and having that confidence as being, there's no more debate. Kind of saw this a little bit with Kyle McCord with Ohio State. I think there's still some things maybe that he can work on a little bit, but both of those quarterbacks have benefited immensely from their coaches saying, yeah, you're the guy. We're depending on you. You're going to take us to where we need to go. There's no more, questions in their minds. And so both of those decisions have benefited these teams. But perhaps even more than that, the story of the game for the Crimson Tide was kind of classic Bama defense. Just getting all over the field, making the tackles when they needed to, making stops. The second half, the Crimson Tide outscored the Aggies 16-3. They held the Texas A&M offense to only 113 yards, and they also picked up a safety with a sack in the end zone. So a big performance by the Crimson Tide. They are right now outside of the top 10, but I would put them at number 10 right now because the team that is number 10, I'll talk about here, is USC. The Trojans in back-to-back games against, I believe, both of the Arizona schools have gone down to the wire or been pushed late. This one even more so against the Wildcats. It goes to triple overtime. Caleb Williams, reigning Heisman Trophy winner, continues to make the plays that are needed, but there are a lot of holes in that USC defense that teams have been able to exploit so far. Colorado making a run late, Arizona State sticking with them for a bit last week, and then Arizona this week. If the Trojans don't fix those things, an offense like in Oregon or like a Washington will have their way with the Trojans, and I don't think it'll end too well. This coming week, they have a test against a Notre Dame team that is spiraling a little bit at the moment. They've had really tough tests. Obviously, Ohio State at home and then back-to-back road games, but they're sitting with 2 losses. That game, though, will be a good test, I think, for this USC defense because Notre Dame, for the most part, they've been limited by both Ohio State and by Louisville, and I think maybe now it's time to change their perception a little bit about this Irish offense because they've had their struggles recently. But they still have a really good running back in Audric Estime and Sam Hartman at quarterback who threw his first interception of the year against Louisville. And speaking of Louisville, kind of moving into the next topic of another game that obviously caught the attention of college football fans was Jeff Brom's Cardinals getting a big win over the aforementioned Irish. It was a big win in Louisville. The Cards kind of dealt a dire blow to the Irish this season. 2 losses now. Their season's probably done. And on the flip side, Louisville, if they didn't have life and excitement before this win, they are riding high. They're flying high with this win over Notre Dame. And so it's a big win for the Cardinals. They are squarely in the college football playoff picture. They're number 14 right now, but in this ACC, if they can get the job done, who knows? I just looking over the schedule right now, pulling that up. They have Duke at home October 28th. They have Virginia Tech and Virginia then also at home, and then they go to Miami and Kentucky. So they would not face the Seminoles potentially until the ACC championship game. So that is obviously also a huge plus for the Cardinals. And so being able to benefit from that will be a huge positive for the Cardinals. A couple other games to note from this past weekend. Talked about USC and then Georgia in a game that some people were looking at, can Kentucky, make a little bit of noise, stick with the Dogs maybe a little bit. The Dogs completely handled the Cats, 51-13, and right now the Bulldogs truly do still look like the back-to-back national champions, and they're continuing to prove that. Carson Beck threw for almost 400 yards in the win, and they're the clear number one right now. I think Michigan could make a case. The Wolverines are really cruising right now. I think they're looking ahead now to that final 3 games where they have Penn State, Maryland, and Ohio State. It's just a matter of making sure they stay focused on the goal. Have a rivalry game coming up here in a couple weeks at Michigan State that they'll have to, be prepared for and everything. But other than that, the Wolverines should be 9-0 heading into those 3 games at the end. One other game, I've started getting into my top 10 assessments, giving it for the number 1 and number 2 teams, Georgia and Michigan, that they're pretty firmly established as the top 2 teams in college football. But one other thing, Miami. That loss to Georgia Tech should never have happened. There's 35 seconds on the clock or so when they snap the ball for a running play. No timeouts for Georgia Tech. You kneel the ball. Play clock's 40 seconds, so obviously it's running. It's going to run down if you just take a knee there because it was 3rd down. And for whatever reason, they run the ball, and the ball pops loose. It's fumbled. Georgia Tech gets it. Big pass by Haynes King to deliver the, I think, 40-something yard touchdown for the Yellow Jackets. Head coach after the game was definitely emotional about it, which was whenever you see those reactions from coaches, it's always pretty cool to see. But Mario Cristobal, what was going on with that? And I saw something. If I could find it, I'll pop it up on screen here. That it's kind of been a trend for the Hurricanes this year of not kneeling, even when they're up by a couple touchdowns, running the ball on the final play. I don't know if that's his style or if it's unawareness of the moment or something. I don't know what the issue is there, but it's definitely something that cost the Hurricanes just incredibly poorly and cost the team that was undefeated and starting to, make a little bit of waves and could have been looking ahead to a game against Florida State at the end of the season that might have been between 2 undefeated teams, but instead the Hurricanes are probably out of contention altogether because they also face Miami among a couple of other tough games down the home stretch. So that's kind of my thoughts from the games. Now moving in to kind of assessments of the top 10 teams, and I'm going to run through this a little bit quickly, just kind of, sentence thoughts. Georgia at number 1, again, mentioned them already. They are the top dog. Michigan's close, but Georgia, I think, showed that they're the clear number 1 team with a top 25 win against Kentucky. Michigan, again, is cruising to that gauntlet of a final 3-game stretch against Penn State, Maryland, and Ohio State. If they're not undefeated, it would be honestly a complete shock. Ohio State, number 3. They kind of had a tentative first half against Maryland. It was tied at 10 at halftime, but then they figured things out, had a strong second half. They've got at Purdue next. You don't want to get caught looking ahead in this game, and because they have Penn State in a couple of weeks on October 21st, so you don't want to get caught looking ahead. Buckeye fans know about how the most recent game in West Lafayette went, and that cannot happen again. So they need to maybe get off to a stronger start than they did against Maryland. But Maryland is a tough team. I'll give them credit for that for sure. FSU, Florida State, is starting to find their footing at number 4. Are they top 4 worthy? I would still think so. LSU looked a little bit better after their win against Missouri on the road against a team that was 5-0 and playing really well in the Battle of Tigers. Clemson still, they've lost twice, but those are both good losses. I think the next 2 weeks for Florida State will really prove their status as a contender because if they slip up, that's potentially it for the Seminoles against both Syracuse and Duke. Those are both good tests. Oklahoma, talked about them. They look like they're going to waltz into the Big 12 championship. And when you say things like that, you got to be careful as the Sooners of not looking ahead too much to that, taking it week by week, like coaches always say. But they look like they'll be heading into the Big 12 championship game and probably to meet number 9 Texas as well. Penn State at number 6. They've got UMass. I don't even think there's any risk there really of looking ahead to Ohio State. They should just wipe the floor against the Minutemen, and that'll be, a big game. Probably, barring one of these other teams slipping up, it'll be a top 6 matchup, could be top 5, but that'll be a big game in a couple weeks, Ohio State against Penn State. At number 7 and number 8, I'm going to save this one for a video later this week as kind of a preview. You've got Washington at 7 and Oregon at 8. Top 2 teams in the Pac-12, especially with the struggles that USC has had recently, and they face off. Game day is going to be there, 3:30 Eastern on ABC, 12:30 Pacific time. And so that's a huge game. Again, I'm going to be diving into that one more. Both teams coming in off a bye, so plenty of preparation for this game that could be effectively a college football playoff play-in game for the conference. And then at number 9, Texas. They're still a good team. They lost to a really good Oklahoma team, late touchdown, and again, mentioned briefly earlier, they're probably on a collision course with the Sooners again, this time in Arlington at AT&T Stadium for the Big 12 championship game. Finally, number 10, USC. Holes on defense that they need to address. Again, talked about this earlier. If they don't address those when they come up against an offense like a Washington or an Oregon, could spell big trouble for them. And then final thing, I would put Alabama at number 10. I think I pretty much agree with this AP top 10. I think it's a really good order of teams. I would just swap out Alabama with USC because the Crimson Tide are starting to pick up steam. They got a good win over a solid Ole Miss team. They handled business against Mississippi State on the road and then pick up a tough road win against Texas A&M for the second straight week on the road. So let me know your thoughts on the top 10. Let me know if you think that I got my observations right, or if the AP, if the national media got the poll right this week. If you enjoyed this video, again, please feel free to leave a like, consider subscribing to the channel. And without further ado, this is Peter Burtnett, College Football Talk, signing out. Peace.